Hello guys! Welcome back to this channel Artificial Facts. Please like, comment, and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell below. My friends will lead you for knowing the materials. Say hi, Gis.
Hi.
Hello guys. Let's get started.
Our current topic is consumer choice theory.
So, what is consumer choice?
Consumer choice is a microeconomic theory that relates consumer demand curves to consumer preferences. The theory seeks to understand the source of consumer demand through consumer theory. This theory views that consumers fully understand what they choose.
Determinants of consumer choice.
First, income. Consumer choices are based on various economic circumstances. One of them is income.
Does that mean that consumer choices are limited by income?
Yes. The second is riches.
Wait, riches?
Not riches you have in your mind. This is much different. So the wealth effect reflects changes in consumer choices based on perceived wealth. The third is price. When the price rises or falls, the consumption of certain types of goods changes.
May you give us example, please?
Sure. This cooking oil availability curve in Indonesia. In the cooking oil market, the equilibrium price of cooking oil is the price at the time the government has not set a one-price policy. This price is considered by the government to be too high, so the highest retail price is set below the equilibrium price. Prior to the determination of the highest retail price on cooking oil, consumers will buy cooking oil at the prevailing market price at a certain amount according to the market.
Optimal choices. When traced along the budget line means that the movement of the indifference curve is higher, and when it comes to the indifference curve that just touches the budget line is the optimal point. In this figure, the bundle of goods associated with the highest indifference curve that only touches the budget line is labeled X1, X2.
So where is the optimal consumption position?
So, the optimal consumption position is where the indifference curve is tangent to the budget line.
Means X1, X2 is the optimal choice for consumers.
Very nice. So bundle X1, X2 is the best bundle that consumers can afford. Rigid taste. An indifference curve may have a tangent. The indifference curve has stiffness at the optimal choice, and the tangent is undefined.
Why did it happen?
Because the mathematical definition of a tangent requires that there is a specific tangent at each point. This does not have much economic significance and is more of a nuisance to something else. The optimal point here occurs where consumption is at zero. The slope of the indifference curve and the slope of the budget line are different, but the indifference curve still does not cross the budget line. Optimum limit. We have found necessary conditions to satisfy the optimal selection requirements. If the optimal choice involves the consumption of two types of goods, then of course the indifference curve will be tangent to the budget line.
But does the tangent require sufficient conditions for the bundle to be optimal with the budget line? If we find a bundle where the indifference curve is tangent to the budget line, can we make sure we have the optimal choice?
Here we have 3 bundles where this tangent condition is satisfied, but there are only 2 optimal points. So in general, the point of tangency condition is only a necessary condition for optimality, not a sufficient condition. More than one point of tangency. There are 3 tangents here, but only 2 are optimal, so the tangent condition is necessary but not sufficient.
This, much better to use a study case example, I think.
There is one other case, namely, the condition where preferences are convex. In the case of a convex preference, every point that satisfies the tangent condition must be an optimal point. Convex indifference curves must curve away from the budget line. They cannot bend back to touch it again.
Consumer demand.
The optimal choice of goods 1 and 2 at the price and income levels is called the consumer demand bundle. In general, when prices and incomes change, the consumer's optimal choice will change. The demand function is a function that relates the optimal choice quantity of demand with different values. Perfect substitute items. The perfect substitute item has 3 possible causes. If P2 more bigger than P1, then the slope of the budget line is flatter than the slope of the indifference curve. In this case, the optimal bundle is where the consumer spends all his money on the purchase of item 1. If P1 P2, then the consumer purchases only on item 2. Finally, if P1 equals P2, there are various optimal choices. Any quantities of items 1 and 2 that meet the budget constraint in this case are optimal. If 2 goods are perfect substitutes, consumers will buy the cheaper one. If both goods have the same price, then the consumer does not care which one he buys. Optimal choice with perfect replacement. If the item is a perfect substitute, the optimal choice will be at the limit. Optimal choice with perfect complement. If goods are perfect complement, the quantity demanded will always lie on the diagonal because the optimal choice occurs where x1 is equal to x2. Under conditions of perfect complementarity, the optimal choice must always lie diagonally, where the consumer is buying the same quantity of both goods, no matter what the price is. For example, a pair of shoes left and right is the perfect complement. Since 2 goods are always consumed together, it is the same if the consumer spends all his money on an item that has a price of P1 plus P2. This is a table of demand for 2 goods at different prices and income levels prevailing in different years. The portion of income spent on each item in each year has been calculated using the formula S1 equals P1 x1m and S2 equals P2 x2m. For these data, expenses are relatively constant. The utility of this form will result in a behavioral choice that is quite close to the observed choice behavior. For convenience, we have calculated the utility associated with each observation using this Cobb-Douglas utility function estimate. As far as we know from observed behavior, as if the consumer maximizes the function ux1, x2 equals x. The theory of consumer choice describes how people make decisions, consumption, and saving, and on and on. At this point, however, you might be tempted to treat the theory of consumer choice with some skepticism. After all, you are a consumer. You decide what to buy every time you walk into a store, and you know that you do not decide by writing down budget constraints and indifference curves. The theory of consumer choice does not try to present a literal account of how people make decisions. It is a model. The best way to view the theory of consumer choice is as a metaphor for how consumers make decisions.
Let me ask you, what would you choose? Or what do you prefer to watch between this to film?
Me personally choose Detective Conan: The Bride of Halloween.
I prefer the Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
Oh, we have different types of film.
Yes.
No problem. We're different because it's your choice, and one of you are a fan of anime, right? And the last one is not an anime fan, so we choose to watch Doctor Strange.
Yes, I am an anime fan. That's why I choose the Detective Conan movie or film.
At this time, we will give you another example about our running topic today.
Homogeneous divisible goods. The consumer will choose the indifference curve with the highest utility that is attainable within his budget constraint. Every point on indifference curve I3 is outside his budget constraint, so the best that he can do is the single point on I2, where the latter is tangent to his budget constraint. Indifference curve analysis begins with the utility function. The utility function is treated as an index of utility. All that is necessary is that the utility index change as more preferred bundles are consumed. On a plane with 2 kinds of commodities that meet the different needs of consumers, a curve composed of a series of points that consumers feel indifference becomes an indifference curve. The tangent point between the indifference curve and the budget line is the point at which consumer satisfaction is maximized. Indifference curves are typically numbered with the number increasing as more preferred bundles are consumed. The numbers have no cardinal significance. For example, if 3 indifference curves are labeled 1, 4, and 16 respectively, that means nothing more than the bundles on indifference curve 4 are more preferred than the bundles on indifference curve 1. Income effect and price effect deal with how the change in price of a commodity changes the consumption of the good. The theory of consumer choice examines the trade-offs and decisions people make in their role as consumers as prices and their income changes. As shown in the diagram, I1, 2, 3 are 3 indifference curves. The product combinations represented by all points on I1 have the same utility to consumers. Similarly, the product combinations on I2 and I1 have the same utility to consumers. However, the utility of the product combination on the I3 curve, the utility of the product combination on the I2 curve, the utility of the product combination on the I1 curve.
The income effect. Suppose a consumer makes $1,000 a month and spends all of his money on either pizza or Pepsi. The graph shows the amount the consumer could afford. If the price of Pepsi is $2 and the price of pizza is $10, the income effect point where he spends exactly $500 on each is. This line is called budget constraint because the slope is 500 vertical distance, horizontal distance 250. This would mean 500 per 100 or 5 Pepsi to 1 pizza. We ignore the minus sign.
Why does the demand curve slope downward?
Reasons for the downward sloping demand curve. Income effect. The change in consumption that results from the movement to a higher indifference curve. Substitution effect. The change in consumption that results from being on an indifference curve with a marginal rate of substitution. For properties of indifference curves. First, higher indifference curves are preferred to lower ones. The second, indifference curves are downward sloping. Next is, indifference curves do not cross, and indifference curves are bowed inward.
Higher indifference curves are preferred to lower ones. Consumer usually prefer more to less. Therefore, a consumer would prefer point D to point A because it is on a higher indifference curve. Indifference curves are downward sloping. The IC reflects the rate at which consumers are willing to substitute one good for another. Therefore, if Q of one good is reduced, then the Q of the other must increase to make the consumer equally happy. Indifference curves do not cross. This could never happen. According to this indifference curves, the consumer would be equally happy at point of B and C, even though point C has more of both goods. Indifference curves are bowed inward. This shape implies that the marginal rate of substitution, or MRS, depends on the Q of the two goods the consumer is consuming. When IC or less BOX, the goods are eased to substitute for each other. What the consumer wants. Representing preference with indifference curves. This picture shows two of the consumer's many indifference curves. The consumer is indifferent among combinations A, B, and C, because they are all on the same curve. Not surprisingly, if the consumer's consumption of pizza is reduced, say, from point A to point B, consumption of Pepsi must increase to keep him equally happy. If consumption of pizza is reduced again, from point B to point C, the amount of Pepsi consumed must increase yet again. The slope at any point on an indifference curve equals the rate at which the consumer is willing to substitute one good for the other. This rate is called the marginal rate of substitution, MRS.
Yes, that is the last part of our topic for consumer choice. Finally, guys, before we end this video, if you like this video, please like, comment, share, and subscribe this channel. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.